Tommy's hands were shaking as he looked at the pile of bills on his desk. The numbers didn't lie. His small auto repair shop was drowning in debt, and he had maybe 2 weeks before everything would be taken away from him. It was a cold Tuesday morning in October, when everything started falling apart. Tommy had been running his garage for 3 years now. Ever since he came back from the military, he thought fixing cars would be simple. People need their cars fixed. He knew how to fix them, and that should be enough. But running a business turned out to be much harder than he ever imagined. The big chain repair shops had moved into town 6 months ago. They had fancy equipment, bright lights, and could offer cheaper prices because they bought parts in huge quantities. One by one, his regular customers started going there instead. Mrs. Johnson, who used to bring her old Ford every month, hadn't been in for 3 months. The Martinez family, who trusted him with their delivery van, had switched to the chain shop last week. Tommy walked around his garage looking at all the empty spaces where cars used to be. His assistant Jake, a smart 19-year-old kid who was great with engines, was sweeping the floor for the 3rd time that day just to stay busy. Jake had been working for half his usual pay for the past 2 months, and Tommy felt terrible about it. The kid had real talent and could probably get a better job anywhere else. "Boss, Mrs. Chen is here with her grandson's car," Jake called out from the front door. Tommy wiped his greasy hands on his coveralls and walked outside. Mrs. Chen was standing next to a beat-up Honda that was making terrible noises. Her grandson, David, was home from college, and this old car was his only way to get to his part-time job. "Tommy, I'm so sorry to bother you," Mrs. Chen said, looking worried. "David's car just stopped working yesterday. It was making loud banging sounds, and now it won't start at all." Tommy popped the hood and immediately knew what was wrong. The engine was completely destroyed. A connecting rod had broken and torn through the engine block. This wasn't something you could just fix with new parts. The car needed a whole new engine. "I'm afraid it's pretty bad, Mrs. Chen," Tommy said gently. "The engine is completely broken. You'd need a new one." Mrs. Chen's face fell. "How much would that cost?" Tommy did some quick math in his head. A used engine would cost at least $1,500 plus his labor. For a car that was probably worth less than $3,000, it didn't make financial sense. "With parts and labor, you're looking at around $2,000, he said honestly. Mrs. Chen sat down heavily on the curb. "We don't have that kind of money. David needs this car to get to work. Without work, he can't pay for college." Tommy felt his heart sink. Here was a family that needed help, and he needed the work. But the math just didn't work out for anyone. This was exactly the kind of situation that had been happening more and more lately. After Mrs. Chen left, promising to think about what to do, Tommy sat in his office staring at those bills again. The rent was due in 5 days. The parts supplier wanted payment for the last order. The electric company had already sent 2 warning notices. That evening, after Jake had gone home, Tommy walked around his garage in the dim light. In the back corner, he had been collecting old car parts for years. Whenever he replaced parts on customers' cars, he kept the old ones. Even broken parts sometimes had good pieces that could be used for something else. His military training had taught him never to waste anything that might be useful later. There were old engines, transmissions, brake parts, and boxes full of smaller components. Most people would call it junk, but Tommy saw something different. He saw possibilities. He pulled out his phone and called his old Army buddy Mike, who worked at a scrapyard across town. "Mike, it's Tommy. I need a favor. Do you have any old engine blocks that aren't completely destroyed?" "Probably," Mike said. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about doing something crazy." The next morning, Tommy and Jake drove to Mike's scrapyard. They spent 2 hours looking through piles of old engines, searching for parts that might work together. Tommy found an old engine block from a 1985 Camaro that had a crack in it, but the crack was small and could probably be fixed. Jake spotted a set of pistons from a newer Honda that looked like they might fit if they were modified slightly. "Boss, what exactly are we doing?" Jake asked, as they loaded parts into Tommy's pickup truck. "We're going to build an engine from scratch," Tommy said. "We're going to take all these old broken parts and turn them into something that works better than what you can buy new." Jake looked at him like he was crazy. Is that even possible? I don't know, Tommy admitted. But Mrs. Chen needs an engine. She can afford, and we need work. Sometimes when you don't have good options, you have to create new ones. Back at the garage, Tommy spread all the parts out on his workbench. It looked like a puzzle with pieces from 5 different boxes. Nothing matched perfectly. Everything would need to be modified, adjusted, or completely rebuilt. Tommy had always been good with engines, even as a kid. In the army, he had learned to fix vehicles with whatever parts were available. Sometimes in the field, you couldn't wait for the right part to be shipped from a warehouse. You had to make do with what you had and figure out how to make it work. But this was different. This wasn't just fixing something that was broken. This was creating something entirely new from pieces that were never meant to work together. He started with the engine block. The crack wasn't too bad, but it went all the way through to the water jacket. Tommy spent the entire first day carefully, welding the crack, then grinding and smoothing the repair until it was stronger than the original metal around it. Jake watched and learned, asking questions and helping wherever he could. The kid had natural instincts for this kind of work. He could look at a part and somehow know if it would work or not, even if he couldn't explain why. Jake, hand me that micrometer, Tommy said as he measured the cylinder walls. We need to know exactly how big these cylinders are so we can figure out what pistons will fit. They worked late into the night, measuring everything twice and writing down all the numbers. Tommy had notebooks full of measurements, sketches, and ideas. This wasn't just about throwing parts together and hoping for the best. Every piece had to be perfect, or the whole thing would fall apart. The second day was about the pistons. The Honda pistons were close to the right size, but not exactly right. Tommy spent hours with his machine tools, carefully removing tiny amounts of metal until each piston fit perfectly in its cylinder. Too loose, and the engine would burn oil and lose power. Too tight, and the engine would seize up and destroy itself. Jake proved to be amazingly helpful with the detail work. His young eyes could spot tiny scratches or imperfections that Tommy might miss. More importantly, Jake seemed to understand what they were trying to accomplish. He didn't just follow orders. He anticipated what would be needed next. By the third day, word had started to spread around town. Other mechanics dropped by to see what Tommy was doing. Some thought he was wasting his time. Others were curious about whether it would actually work. You know, Tommy, said Bill from the tire shop down the street, even if you get this thing to run, who's going to buy a car with a homemade engine in it? Tommy looked up from the intake manifold he was modifying. Mrs. Chen will if it works and she can afford it. The intake manifold was one of the biggest challenges. It had to deliver the right amount of air to each cylinder, and the one from the Camaro didn't match the cylinder head they were using. Tommy ended up cutting it apart and welding it back together in a completely different configuration. Jake had the idea to use computer software to calculate the airflow. He had learned about fluid dynamics in his high school physics class, and he thought they could make the manifold work even better than the original design. Boss, what if we made these passages a little bit bigger here and smaller here? Jake suggested, pointing to his drawings. The air would flow faster and create better mixture in the cylinders. Tommy looked at the drawings. The kid was right. They weren't just copying what had been done before. They were actually improving on it. By the end of the third day, they had an engine that looked like nothing anyone had ever seen before. It had parts from 6 different vehicles, spanning 30 years of automotive history. The engine block was from 1985. The pistons were from 2003. The cylinder head was from 1992. And the electronic ignition system was from a 2010 truck that had been totaled in an accident. Everything was clean, properly assembled, and ready for testing. Tommy had double-checked every measurement, every clearance, and every connection. In theory, it should work. But theory and reality don't always match up when it comes to engines. Well, Jake, Tommy said as they stood looking at their creation, tomorrow we find out if we're geniuses or if we just wasted 3 days building the world's most expensive paperweight. Jake grinned. Either way, boss, this has been more fun than anything we've done in months. Tommy had to agree. For the first time in months, he felt like he was actually solving problems instead of just worrying about money. Whether the engine worked or not, he had remembered why he loved working on cars in the first place. Tommy's hands were sweating as he reached for the key. 3 days of work had led to this moment. Jake stood beside him, holding his breath. The engine they had built from scrap parts sat in Mrs. Chen's grandson's Honda, looking completely out of place but somehow right at the same time. "Here we go," Tommy whispered, and turned the key. The engine cranked once, twice, then roared to life with a sound neither of them had ever heard before. It wasn't the rough idle of an old engine or the smooth hum of a new one. It was something in between, powerful but controlled like a sleeping giant that had just woken up. Jake's eyes went wide. "Boss, listen to that." Tommy was already listening. He had been around engines his whole life, and he could tell just by the sound that something special was happening. The engine was running smoother than it had any right to, considering it was built from parts that came from 6 different vehicles. "Let's check the numbers," Tommy said, trying to contain his excitement. He connected his diagnostic computer to the engine and watched the readings appear on the screen. The numbers didn't make sense. The engine was producing more power than either of the original engines it was built from. The fuel consumption was better than expected. The emissions were cleaner than engines that cost 10 times more to build. "How is this possible?" Jake asked, staring at the computer screen. "I don't know," Tommy admitted. "But sometimes when you mix things that weren't meant to go together, you get something better than what you started with." Mrs. Chen arrived an hour later with her grandson David. She looked nervous, probably expecting bad news about her car. "Mrs. Chen, we have some good news," Tommy said with a big smile. "Your car is ready." David got behind the wheel and started the engine. His face lit up immediately. "Grandma, this sounds amazing. What did you do to it?" Tommy explained how they had built a completely new engine using old parts. David, who was studying engineering in college, was fascinated by the technical details. He asked to look under the hood, and Tommy was happy to show him everything they had done. "This is incredible," David said. "You basically created a hybrid engine using the best parts from different generations of cars. The torque curve from the old Camaro block combined with the efficiency improvements from the newer components. This is like advanced engineering stuff." "It was mostly just trying to make things work with what we had," Tommy said modestly. David took the car for a test drive around the block. When he came back, he was grinning from ear to ear. "Mr. Tommy, this car has never run this good, not even when it was new." Word spread quickly through their small town. By the next morning, 3 other mechanics had stopped by to see the Frankenstein engine that was supposed to be impossible to build. Bill from the tire shop was the first to arrive. "Tommy, I heard you actually got that crazy engine to work. Mind if I take a look?" Tommy popped the hood and explained what they had done. Bill listened carefully, nodding and asking technical questions. He had been working on cars for 20 years and knew good work when he saw it. "I'll be honest, Tommy. When I heard what you were trying to do, I thought you had lost your mind. But this is really impressive work. This engine should be in a museum or something." The second visitor was Carlos, who ran the performance shop on the other side of town. Carlos specialized in building race cars and hot rods, so he knew a thing or two about custom engines. "Tommy, can I hear this thing run?" Carlos asked. Jake started the engine and Carlos listened intently. He asked Tommy to rev it up, then let it idle, then rev it again. His expression grew more and more amazed. "Man, this sounds better than engines I've built that cost $15,000. What kind of horsepower are you getting out of this thing?" "We haven't dyno tested it yet," Tommy admitted. "We don't have access to that kind of equipment." "Well, I do," Carlos said. "If you're interested, bring it by my shop tomorrow. I'd love to see what this baby can really do." That evening, Jake had an idea. "Boss, what if we made a video showing how we built this engine? My sister is always posting stuff online, and she says videos of people building things get lots of views." Tommy wasn't sure about putting their work on the internet, but Jake was enthusiastic about the idea. People love seeing things get fixed and rebuilt, and this story is pretty amazing. Guy builds super engine from junk to save his business and help his neighbor. They spent the next 2 hours going through the photos Jake had taken during the build process. Jake had documented everything without Tommy even realizing it. There were pictures of the cracked engine block, The welding repairs, the modified pistons, the custom intake manifold, and the final assembly. "Jake, when did you take all these pictures?" Tommy asked. "I don't know, I just thought it was cool what we were doing. I take pictures of everything. My friends always make fun of me for it." Jake put together a simple video showing the whole build process. He explained what they were doing in each step, keeping the language simple so that anyone could understand. The video was 15 minutes long and showed the transformation from a pile of junk parts to a running engine. "Should we really post this online?" Tommy asked. He was worried that other mechanics might steal their ideas or that someone might criticize their work. "Boss, what's the worst that could happen? Maybe nobody watches it. But maybe someone sees it who needs help with their car, or maybe another mechanic learns something useful." Jake uploaded the video late that night. He gave it a simple title: "Building a Custom Engine from Scrap Parts. Will it work?" The next morning, Tommy woke up to 17 missed calls on his phone. The video had been shared hundreds of times overnight, and people were calling from all over the country wanting to know more about the engine. Jake was at the shop early, practically bouncing with excitement. "Boss, you're not going to believe this. The video has been watched 20,000 times already, and people are going crazy in the comments." Tommy looked at Jake's phone and scrolled through some of the comments. Engineers from car companies were asking technical questions. Mechanics were sharing their own stories of building custom engines. College students were asking if they could write research papers about their design. But the most important call came from Danny Rodriguez, a local guy who raced cars at the drag strip on weekends. "Tommy, I saw your video, and I heard your engine running at Carlos's shop yesterday. I've got a proposition for you." Danny explained that he had a 1990 Mustang that he raced every weekend, but the engine was getting tired and needed to be rebuilt. Instead of building a traditional racing engine that would cost him $8,000, he wanted to know if Tommy could build him a custom engine like the one in Mrs. Chen's Honda. "I don't need it to be pretty," Danny said. "I just need it to be fast and reliable. If you can build something that will run consistent quarter-mile times, I'll pay you $3,000 and tell everyone at the track where I got it." Tommy was hesitant. Building an engine for Mrs. Chen's daily driver was one thing. Building an engine for a race car was completely different. Race engines had to perform under extreme conditions and couldn't afford to break down. "Danny, I appreciate the offer, but I've never built a race engine before. I wouldn't want to take your money and then have the engine blow up on you." "Tommy, I've been racing for 10 years and I've blown up plenty of engines. That's just part of racing, but what you built for Mrs. Chen is something special. I can hear it in the way that engine runs. It's got character, you know? It sounds like it wants to go fast." Jake was nodding enthusiastically. "Boss, this could be exactly what we need. If we can build race engines, we'll have customers lining up." Tommy thought about it for the rest of the day. That evening, he called Danny back. "All right, Danny, I'll build you an engine. But I want to be clear about something. This is experimental. I can't guarantee it will work the way you want it to. And if it breaks, you can't blame me." "Fair enough," Danny said. "When can we start?" "Give me 2 weeks to research race engine requirements and gather the right parts. This isn't going to be like the Honda engine. We're going to need stronger components for racing." Over the next week, Tommy dove deep into learning about race engines. He borrowed books from the library, watched online videos, and called other engine builders for advice. Most were helpful and gave him tips about what worked and what didn't. The most important thing he learned was that race engines weren't necessarily more complicated than street engines. They just had to be built more carefully with better parts and tighter tolerances. Jake became his research partner, finding technical papers online and learning about advanced engine theories. The kid was like a sponge, absorbing information and then coming up with practical applications. "Boss, what if we use the same basic design as Mrs. Chen's engine, but with forged pistons instead of cast ones? And maybe a better camshaft for more high-end power?" Tommy smiled. Jake was starting to think like a real engine builder. By the end of the week, they had a plan for Danny's race engine. It would use the same innovative approach as their first engine, but with components specifically chosen for racing applications. More importantly, Tommy realized that they had accidentally discovered something valuable. Their method of combining parts from different eras wasn't just a way to save money. It was actually a way to create engines that performed better than conventional designs. "Jake," Tommy said as they closed up the shop that Friday evening, "I think we might be onto something big here." Tommy was under the hood of Danny's Mustang, making final adjustments to the custom race engine they had just finished building. It was 7 in the morning on a Tuesday, and the shop was quiet except for the sound of his wrench turning bolts. Jake wouldn't arrive for another hour, so Tommy enjoyed these peaceful moments when he could focus completely on his work. The race engine had turned out even better than he had hoped. Using the same principles they had learned from Mrs. Chen's Honda, but with much stronger parts designed for racing, they had created something truly special. The engine had been tested on Carlos's dyno and produced numbers that made experienced racers stop and stare. Tommy was so focused on his work that he didn't hear the vehicles pulling up outside. It wasn't until he heard car doors slamming that he looked up from the engine bay. Through the garage door, he could see a black SUV parked in front of his shop. Behind it was a huge truck hauler with a race car on the back. Tommy wiped his hands on his coveralls and walked outside to see what was going on. A man in his 50s got out of the SUV. He was wearing expensive clothes and had the confident walk of someone who was used to being in charge. Behind him, 2 other men in racing uniforms climbed out of the truck. "Are you Tommy?" the older man asked, extending his hand. "I'm Robert Sterling. I own Sterling Racing." Tommy shook his hand, trying not to show how surprised he was. He had heard of Sterling Racing. They were one of the smaller NASCAR teams, but they had been around for 15 years and had won several races. "Mr. Sterling, what brings you all the way out here?" Tommy asked, still not quite believing what was happening. "I saw your video," Robert said with a smile. "The one where you built that engine from scrap parts. I've been in racing for 20 years and I've never seen anything quite like what you did." Tommy looked at the race car on the trailer. It was a real NASCAR Cup Series car, painted in bright blue with sponsored decals covering every inch. He had watched these cars on television hundreds of times, but he had never seen one up close. "I drive 8 hours from North Carolina to get here," Robert continued. "I had to see your work in person. Do you think I could take a look at that engine you built?" Tommy led them into the garage where Danny's Mustang sat with the hood up. The custom race engine gleamed under the shop lights, every component carefully placed and perfectly assembled. Robert bent over the engine, examining every detail. His 2 crew members joined him, and Tommy could hear them whispering technical terms to each other. After several minutes, Robert stood up and looked at Tommy, with a serious expression. "Tommy, how long have you been building engines like this? Honestly, Mr. Sterling, you're looking at only the second engine we've ever built this way. The first one was for Mrs. Chen's Honda about 3 weeks ago." Robert's eyebrows went up. "You mean you've only been doing this for 3 weeks?" "Well, I've been fixing engines for years, but building completely custom engines from mixed parts, yeah, this is pretty new for us." One of Robert's crew members, a guy named Pete who looked like he had been around race cars his whole life, spoke up. "Boss, look at this intake manifold design. This is really smart engineering. And the way he's combined these different cylinder head configurations shouldn't work, but it obviously does." Robert nodded, then turned back to Tommy. "Tommy, I'm going to be straight with you. My team is in trouble. We've been buying engines from the big manufacturers, but they're pricing us out of the market. A competitive NASCAR engine costs us $60,000, and we need fresh engines every few races." Tommy tried not to show his shock at hearing those numbers. $60,000 was more money than his shop made in 6 months. The big teams with unlimited budgets can afford to buy the best engines, Robert continued. But smaller teams like mine are getting squeezed out. We can't compete when we're spending all our money just to have engines that keep up. Jake arrived at that moment, stopping short when he saw the NASCAR hauler parked outside. He walked into the garage with his mouth hanging open, staring at the race car and the crew members. "Jake, come over here," Tommy called. "I want you to meet some people." Robert shook Jake's hand and smiled. "So you're Tommy's partner in this engine building business?" "I guess so," Jake said, still staring at the race car. "I mostly just help with the technical stuff and take pictures." "Those pictures in that video you made got my attention," Robert said. "I've shown it to engineers who have been building race engines for 30 years, and they're all impressed by what you two accomplished." Pete, the crew member, walked over to Jake. "Kid, that video you made explains engine theory better than most textbooks. You've got a real talent for breaking down complicated stuff and making it easy to understand." Jake's face turned red, but Tommy could see he was proud of the compliment. Robert walked around the garage looking at Tommy's collection of old parts and the tools he used for his custom work. "Tommy, I have a proposition for you. What if I told you I wanted to hire you to build engines for my NASCAR team?" Tommy felt like someone had just hit him in the stomach. "Mr. Sterling, I appreciate the offer, but I don't know anything about NASCAR engines. The rules, the specifications, the testing requirements, I wouldn't even know where to start." "That's what I thought you'd say," Robert replied. "So let me explain something. NASCAR engines aren't as different from what you're already doing as you might think. Yes, there are rules and specifications, but the basic principles are the same. You take components and make them work together to produce power reliably." Robert's other crew member, a younger guy named Tony, joined the conversation. "The thing is, most NASCAR engine builders are stuck thinking inside the box. They all use the same approaches, the same combinations, the same ideas. What you're doing is thinking outside the box." "But I'm just a small-town mechanic," Tommy protested. "I fix pickup trucks and family cars. I don't know anything about racing at 200 miles per hour." "Tommy," Robert said seriously, "do you know what the biggest problem in NASCAR is right now? It's that all the engines are becoming too similar. The big manufacturers have so much data and so many rules that they all end up building basically the same engine. The racing is getting boring because nobody can find a real advantage." Pete nodded in agreement. "What we need is someone who thinks differently, someone who looks at a pile of parts and sees possibilities instead of limitations." Robert walked over to where Tommy kept his notebooks full of engine measurements and design ideas. "Can I look at these?" Tommy nodded, and Robert flipped through several pages. Jake's detailed drawings and calculations were mixed in with Tommy's practical notes and sketches. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Robert said, pointing to one of Jake's airflow diagrams. "You're not just copying what everyone else does. You're actually engineering solutions to problems." Tommy looked at Jake, who was practically vibrating with excitement. The kid had dreamed of working in racing his whole life, and here was a real NASCAR team owner offering them a chance. "Mr. Sterling, even if I wanted to try this, I don't have the equipment or the facilities to build NASCAR engines. Look around this place. I've got basic tools and a bunch of junk parts." "Tommy, I'm not asking you to build engines in this garage," Robert said with a laugh. "If you agree to work with us, I'll set you up with a proper engine shop, modern equipment, experienced technicians to help you, and access to all the parts and materials you need." The offer was starting to sound real, and Tommy felt his heart beating faster. But he also felt scared. This was way beyond anything he had ever imagined doing. "What exactly would you want me to do?" Tommy asked. "I want you to apply your innovative approach to NASCAR engines," Robert explained. "Instead of buying cookie-cutter engines from the big manufacturers, I want to build our own engines using your methods. Engines that are different, that give us an advantage, that make our cars competitive again." Tony spoke up again. "The thing is, Tommy, NASCAR has rules about what parts you can use and how engines have to be built. But within those rules, there's still room for creativity. There's still room for someone like you to find combinations that nobody else has thought of." Robert pulled out his phone and showed Tommy some pictures. "This is our engine shop in North Carolina. 15,000 square feet with dyno rooms, machine shops, and assembly areas. Right now, it's mostly empty because we can't afford to keep buying engines from the manufacturers." Tommy looked at the pictures. The facility looked like something from a dream, clean, modern, and equipped with tools he had only seen in magazines. "If you came to work for us," Robert continued, "that facility would be yours to use. You'd have a team of experienced engine builders to help you, and you'd have the resources to experiment and develop new ideas." Jake couldn't contain himself any longer. "Boss, this is incredible. This is like winning the lottery." Tommy looked at his young assistant. Jake deserved this opportunity more than anyone. The kid had real talent and could go far in the racing world. But Tommy also thought about his little garage, his regular customers, and the community he had built here. Mrs. Chen still brought her car in for oil changes. Bill from the tire shop. Stopped by for coffee every morning. This place had become more than just a business, it was home. "Mr. Sterling, this is a big decision," Tommy said carefully. "Can I have some time to think about it?" "Of course," Robert replied, "but I hope you'll consider it seriously. The racing world needs people like you, people who aren't afraid to try new things and think differently." As Robert and his crew prepared to leave, Pete walked over to Tommy one more time. "Tommy, I've been building race engines for 25 years. I've worked for some of the biggest teams in NASCAR, but what you've accomplished here, with basic tools and junk parts, is more impressive than anything I've seen from the big-budget operations." After the NASCAR team left, Tommy and Jake stood in the garage, not quite believing what had just happened. "Boss," Jake said quietly, "are you really thinking about saying no to this?" Tommy looked around his small garage, then at the custom engine they had built for Danny's Mustang. Maybe it was time to find out just how far their crazy ideas could take them. Tommy sat in his office that evening, staring at Robert Sterling's business card. The NASCAR team owner had left it on his desk with a handwritten note. "Call me when you're ready to change your life." Jake had gone home hours ago, but not before, spending 30 minutes talking about how amazing it would be to work for a real NASCAR team. The kid's excitement was infectious, but Tommy felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him like a heavy blanket. He picked up his phone 3 times to call his wife Linda, then put it down each time. "How do you tell someone that a NASCAR team wants to hire you and just last month you were worried about paying the electric bill?" Finally, he drove home to their small house on Maple Street. Linda was in the kitchen, making dinner and humming softly to herself. She had been supporting him through all the tough times with the garage, working extra shifts at the hospital to help pay their bills. "You're home late," she said, giving him a kiss on the cheek. "How was your day?" "Linda, you're not going to believe what happened today," Tommy began, and then told her everything about Robert Sterling's visit. Linda sat down heavily at the kitchen table. "A NASCAR team? Tommy, are you serious?" "Dead serious. They want to move us to North Carolina. Give me a real engine shop and pay me more money than I've ever seen in my life." Linda was quiet for a long time, just looking at him. Finally, she spoke. "What do you want to do?" "I honestly don't know. Part of me thinks this is the chance of a lifetime. But another part of me is scared to death. What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail? Tommy, you just built an engine from junk parts that impressed a NASCAR team owner enough to drive 8 hours to see it. I think you're better than you give yourself credit for." They talked until late that night, going over all the pros and cons. The money would solve all their financial problems. Jake would get opportunities he could never have in their small town. Tommy would be working at the highest level of automotive engineering. But they would have to leave everything they knew. Their friends, their community, the garage that Tommy had built with his own hands. The next morning, Tommy arrived at the shop to find Mrs. Chen waiting for him with a thermos of coffee and a worried expression. "Tommy, I heard about the NASCAR people coming here yesterday. The whole town is talking about it." Tommy opened the garage and invited her inside. "Mrs. Chen, how did you hear about that already?" "Bill from the tire shop told everyone at the diner this morning. He said there were race cars and everything." Mrs. Chen sat down on an old chair Tommy kept for customers. "Tommy, I want to tell you something. When you fixed David's car with that amazing engine you built, you didn't just fix a car. You kept that boy in college. Without that car, he couldn't get to his job. Without his job, he couldn't pay for school." She paused, and Tommy could see tears in her eyes. "What I'm trying to say is, you changed our whole family's life. David graduated last month and got a job as an engineer. He says he wants to build engines like you someday." Tommy felt a lump in his throat. He had been so focused on the technical achievement of building the engine that he hadn't really thought about how it had affected people's lives. "Mrs. Chen, I was just trying to help with your car problem. I know that. That's what makes you special, Tommy. You don't just fix cars, you fix people's problems." Throughout the morning, more people stopped by the garage. Bill from the tire shop brought donuts and wanted to hear all about the NASCAR visit. Carlos from the performance shop came by to congratulate Tommy and ask if he was really going to leave town. Even Danny Rodriguez showed up, fresh from winning his first race with the custom engine Tommy had built for his Mustang. "Tommy, I heard the news," Danny said with a big grin. "Man, this is incredible. You're going to be building engines for NASCAR." "I haven't decided yet," Tommy replied. Danny's expression became serious. "Tommy, you have to take this opportunity. Do you know how many mechanics would kill for a chance like this? You can't let fear hold you back." "It's not just fear, Danny. This place, these people, this is my home, and it always will be. But home isn't just a place, Tommy. It's the people who care about you. And all of us want to see you succeed." Jake arrived late that morning carrying a laptop and looking like he hadn't slept much. "Boss, I've been doing research all night," Jake said, opening his computer. "I found out everything about Sterling Racing. They've been struggling for 3 years because they can't compete with the big team's budgets. But they've got good drivers and a solid crew. All they need is engines that can compete." Jake showed Tommy articles about NASCAR's economic problems. Smaller teams were going out of business because they couldn't afford competitive engines. The sport was becoming dominated by a few wealthy teams, and the racing was getting boring because everyone had similar equipment. "Don't you see, boss? This isn't just about us getting a good job. This is about helping the underdog teams compete again. This is about making racing more exciting." Tommy looked at his young assistant. Jake had grown up a lot in the past few weeks. He wasn't just the kid who swept floors anymore. He was thinking like an engineer and understanding the bigger picture. That afternoon, Robert Sterling called. "Tommy, I hope I'm not pressuring you, but I wanted to let you know that I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. I realize I might have overwhelmed you with everything at once. Mr. Sterling, it's definitely a lot to process. Here's what I want to propose. Instead of asking you to make a huge decision right now, why don't you and Jake come visit our shop in North Carolina? Spend a week with us, see how we operate, meet the crew. No commitment, just a chance to see if this feels right for you." Tommy thought about it. A visit wouldn't hurt, and it would give him a better idea of what he was being offered. "That sounds reasonable, Mr. Sterling. When were you thinking? How about next week? I'll pay for your travel and put you up in a hotel. Just come see what we're all about." After hanging up, Tommy called Jake over. "Pack your bags, kid. We're going to North Carolina." Jake's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? We're going to see a real NASCAR shop?" "We're going to look, Jake. I'm not promising anything beyond that." They spent the rest of the week preparing for the trip. Tommy arranged for Carlos to cover any emergency repairs for his regular customers. He made sure all his current projects were finished or could wait until he got back. The night before they left, Tommy sat in his garage one more time, looking around at everything he had built. The toolboxes his father had given him when he first started working on cars, the lift he had saved up for 2 years to buy, the coffee pot that had brewed thousands of cups for customers waiting for their cars. Linda found him there around midnight. "Having second thoughts?" she asked, sitting down beside him on the workbench. "Just trying to imagine leaving all this behind." "Tommy, you know what I think? I think you're not just scared of failing. I think you're scared of succeeding." Tommy looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "You've spent so long thinking of yourself as just a small-town mechanic that you can't imagine being anything else. But what if you're meant for something bigger? What if this is your chance to show the world what you can really do?" The next morning, Tommy and Jake flew to North Carolina. It was Jake's first time on an airplane, and his excitement was contagious. By the time they landed, Tommy was feeling optimistic about the visit. Robert Sterling met them at the airport personally. "Welcome to North Carolina, gentlemen. Are you ready to see what big league racing looks like?" The Sterling Racing facility was even more impressive in person than it had looked in the pictures. The engine shop was enormous, with computer-controlled machines, dynamometers for testing engines, and assembly areas that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Pete, the crew chief Tommy had met at his garage, gave them a tour of the entire facility. He explained how NASCAR engines were built, tested, and maintained. He showed them the rule book, which was thicker than a phone directory. and explained how teams had to work within very specific guidelines. "The thing is," Pete explained, "everyone reads the same rulebook. Everyone uses similar parts and similar designs. What we need is someone who can find legal advantages that nobody else has thought of." They spent the week learning about NASCAR racing from the inside. Tommy watched engines being built and tested. He talked to engineers who had been in racing for decades. He learned about the business side of the sport and how teams survived financially. Most importantly, he met the drivers. Sterling Racing's main driver was a 28-year-old named Austin, who had been trying to break into the top ranks of NASCAR for 5 years. "Tommy, I've heard about what you did with that Honda engine," Austin said. "If you can bring that kind of innovation to our team, it could change everything for us." By the end of the week, Tommy realized that Robert Sterling wasn't just offering him a job. He was offering him a chance to revolutionize how smaller NASCAR teams competed. On their last day, Robert made his final pitch. "Tommy, I'm going to offer you a 3-year contract, $200,000 a year plus bonuses if we win races. Full health insurance for your family, moving expenses paid, and your own engine development team." Tommy felt dizzy hearing those numbers. It was more money than he had ever imagined making. "And Jake?" Tommy asked. "Full scholarship to study automotive, engineering at the local university, plus a part-time job with our team. When he graduates, he'll have a guaranteed full-time position if he wants it." That evening, Tommy called Linda from his hotel room. "Linda, I think I have to take this job. Not just for the money, but because I think this is what I'm supposed to be doing." "Then take it, Tommy. We'll figure out the rest as we go." The next morning, Tommy shook hands with Robert Sterling and signed the contract. As he put his pen down, he realized his life had just changed forever. 6 months later, Tommy was standing in Victory Lane at Talladega Superspeedway, watching Austin celebrate his first NASCAR Cup Series win. The engine in the winning car was Tommy's design, built with the same innovative approach he had used on Mrs. Chen's Honda. The trophy was nice, but the best part was the phone call he made afterward to his old garage back home, where Mrs. Chen answered the phone with pride in her voice. "Tommy, we all watched the race. You did it.